The salt breeze messed up my hair as I held my chamomile tea. I have a ritual every morning. Just me, the waves, and a moment of quiet before the day begins. But today, that quiet was about to be shattered. I already knew my daughter-in-law's type. Ambitious, cunning, and never satisfied with what she had. She had always resented that I kept control of the family estate, and now, apparently, she decided to act. I set my cup down and walked toward the sliding glass doors. From the terrace, I could see the movers hauling boxes from the driveway. Frank, my security guard, was nervously pacing back and forth, radio in hand. "Mrs. Ballard, should I stop them?" he asked, voice tight. I shook my head. "No, Frank, let them do their thing. The real surprise is about to begin." I smiled to myself, remembering the plan I had quietly set into motion weeks ago. Every time she tried to undermine me in subtle ways, I observed, recorded, and prepared. She thought she could just waltz in and claim my home. She had no idea she was stepping into a trap, one I had designed with precision, patience, and a lifetime of experience. I poured myself another cup of tea, sat back, and watched. Calm, collected, and unshaken. Calm is not weakness, I reminded myself again. It's the weapon of someone who knows how the story ends. And in a few short moments, she would learn what happens when she underestimates a grandmother who has built everything with her own hands. Before we go further, make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories, and comment below where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. Now, let me take you back and explain everything that led to this moment. A story of strategy, patience, and a lesson she would never forget. I remember sitting in my living room, the early sunlight creeping across the polished wooden floors, thinking back to how it all began. My daughter-in-law Vanessa had always been ambitious, never shy about letting people know she wanted more than she had. At first I dismissed her behavior as harmless greed, but over the years it became clear she wasn't just ambitious. She was ruthless, manipulative, and ready to do anything to take control of what wasn't hers. It started subtly. Little comments about how this house should feel more modern, or maybe I could manage the finances better. Innocuous, right? But I knew what she was testing. My patience, my awareness, my authority. She wanted to see how far she could push me before I reacted. Over time, I realized I needed a strategy. I didn't need to confront her with anger. That would be predictable. Instead, I began quietly observing. I took note of her routines, the way she communicated with my son, and even the way she interacted with our staff. Every move she made was cataloged in my mind like pieces on a chessboard. Weeks before that Friday morning, I started preparing. I double-checked every document, ensured all legal papers were updated, and secretly arranged surveillance to confirm her intentions. Vanessa didn't suspect a thing. She thought I was a frail, elderly woman who had grown soft with age. She underestimated me, and that would be her first mistake. That Thursday night, I barely slept. I reviewed every detail: the driveway, the house layout, the placement of cameras, and how the movers would enter. I had even prepared a small surprise in the living room, something that would leave her speechless when she walked in. My hands shook slightly with anticipation, but the tremor wasn't fear. It was excitement. Morning came with the faint orange glow of sunrise over the ocean. I stepped onto the terrace, took a deep breath of the salty breeze, and sipped my chamomile tea. Frank radioed me again, confirming that the movers were on the driveway, vans packed and ready to unload. Vanessa had arrived early, as expected. I could almost hear the haughty look in her voice over the phone when she claimed, "I own this house now. Everything belongs to me." I let out a small laugh. Let her think she had power. Let her feel confident. That was exactly what I wanted. Calm is the most dangerous weapon, the one people rarely see coming. I walked back into the living room, moving slowly so that when Vanessa and her entourage walked in, they would see me in complete control. The house smelled of fresh coffee, polished wood, and the faint scent of the ocean that drifted in through the open terrace doors. Everything was meticulously in place, just as I liked it. And then, the sound of the front door opening, slow, deliberate, announced their arrival. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I simply lifted my chin, gave a faint smile, and waited. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes scanned the room. She expected emptiness, compliance, maybe even fear. Instead, she found silence. And in that silence, she would discover just how wrong she had been to underestimate me. But before the first surprise was revealed, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Comment below and subscribe to Elderly Stories so you don't miss the moment she finally realizes what she's walked into. Little did Vanessa know, by the time she took her first step into the living room, her entire plan was already crumbling, and the lesson she was about to learn would be unforgettable. Vanessa's heels clicked against the polished floor as she stepped further into the living room, her expression a mix of confidence and annoyance. She expected me to be frail, intimidated, maybe even pleading. Instead, I sat in my favorite armchair, calm and collected, sipping my tea as if nothing unusual were happening. Every move I made was deliberate, slow enough to unsettle her, confident enough to remind her she was in my house. The movers shuffled behind her, carrying boxes and furniture, oblivious to the tension in the room. Vanessa waved her hand dismissively, muttering instructions. Put that over there. No, not there, over here. Make sure everything looks perfect. This is my house now. Her voice dripped with entitlement, and for a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. Vanessa, I said, my voice soft but steady. Do you mind telling me why you think you can claim this house? She froze for a second, startled that I was speaking. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. It's time someone took charge. Your son agrees with me. I set my tea down slowly, letting the clink of the cup against the saucer fill the silence. I see. That's when I saw it in her eyes. The flicker of doubt. The realization that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be as easy as she thought. Vanessa had underestimated more than my calm. She didn't know I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, that every corner of this house, every piece of furniture, every hidden detail had been set to reveal the truth about who truly owned it. I gestured toward the hallway. Why don't you see what I've been working on? Curiosity overcame her arrogance. She stepped forward cautiously, signaling the movers to pause. As she entered the hallway, the first box tipped over, spilling contents onto the floor. It looked like clutter at first glance, but inside were meticulously organized documents, photographs, and records, proof of decades of care, investment, and hard work. Her jaw dropped. Where did all this come from? She stammered. I smiled faintly. Every penny, every piece, every memory, mine, all carefully accounted for. Vanessa took a step back, confusion turning into frustration. She tried to assert control again, moving to pick up a box, but I placed a hand lightly on her arm. Don't touch anything. You don't understand what this represents yet. The air grew tense, charged with the weight of truth. She was starting to realize that she wasn't walking into an empty house she could claim. She was walking into decades of effort, strategy, and legacy. A legacy that she could never overpower. Before we move on to what happened next, I have to ask, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Comment below and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories. Moments like this are meant to be shared with everyone who loves clever revenge stories. Vanessa's eyes scanned the hallway again, disbelief written all over her face. She thought she was taking over a house. She didn't know she was stepping into a masterclass of patience, preparation, and strategy, and the lesson was only just beginning. Vanessa's frustration was growing, but she tried to hide it behind a forced smile. I don't understand, she said, her voice tight. All of this, it doesn't change anything. My husband and I agreed I should manage things. He wants a fresh start. I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. A fresh start, yes, but a fresh start doesn't erase decades of effort, responsibility, and ownership. This house, these records, these investments, they are mine, and they always will be. Her face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and anger. She hadn't expected me to be prepared, hadn't expected me to know exactly how to counter her every move. Her assumption had been that age and calm meant weakness. She didn't know that my calm was a weapon honed over a lifetime. The movers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension, unsure if they should continue unloading the boxes or retreat. Vanessa waved them on, muttering about schedules and plans, but her authority was clearly faltering. I could see the seeds of doubt growing in her eyes. I stood up slowly, walking toward her, making sure every step was measured, deliberate. Vanessa, you came here thinking you could take control, but control isn't given. It's earned, and it's protected. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And I have spent a lifetime protecting what's mine, not just for me, but for my family, my legacy, and the memory of those who came before me. She took a step back, trying to regain her composure. You're overreacting, she spat, but her words lacked conviction. I smiled faintly, pointing toward the study. Why don't you see for yourself? There's one more thing you need to understand before you claim anything. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she followed hesitantly. As she entered the study, her eyes widened. The room had been transformed subtly over the past weeks. Documents, family records, framed photos, and memorabilia were all carefully arranged, telling the story of decades of hard work, love, and dedication. Each item had a note attached, explaining its significance and how it connected to our family legacy. Her voice trembled. I didn't realize. I shook my head gently. You never take time to understand, Vanessa. You only take. You assume. That is your mistake. She looked at me, speechless, her carefully constructed confidence crumbling in the face of undeniable truth. For a moment, silence filled the house. She had expected resistance, maybe even confrontation, but not this. Not a methodical, patient, undeniable display of ownership and legacy. Before I continue, let me ask you, what would you have done if someone tried to take over your home like this? Comment below and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories. Moments like this are a reminder that calm, strategy, and patience often speak louder than anger. Vanessa finally realized that her plan was unraveling, but the full lesson, the one that would leave her completely speechless, was still about to unfold. She had no idea what she was in for next. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she looked around the study, absorbing the significance of every detail. I could see the fight in her fading, replaced by confusion and disbelief. This was exactly the effect I had hoped for. She came in thinking she could dominate, but instead, she was stepping into a carefully crafted lesson in patience and respect. Vanessa, I began, my voice calm but firm. There's something you need to see. Something that will make it clear why you cannot simply walk into someone else's home and claim it as your own. I gestured toward a small cabinet in the corner. Open it. Her eyes flickered to me, skeptical. What is this? She asked, hesitating. Just open it, I said, letting the quiet authority in my voice do the work that anger never could. Slowly, she turned the handle. Inside were folders, meticulously organized, containing decades of financial records, property deeds, receipts, and correspondence proving every decision, every investment, every action I had taken to build this home and secure my family's legacy. She froze, her lips parting slightly, eyes wide. All this? She whispered. Yes, I said simply. Every cent, every decision, every moment of sacrifice, and every action you take without understanding it only shows how little you respect what was built before you arrived. Her composure began to crack. She stepped back, taking in the evidence laid out before her. The smugness she carried in the driveway, the confidence she thought would intimidate me. All of it was gone. For the first time, she realized she had underestimated me. I walked slowly toward her, making sure each step echoed in the study, each movement deliberate. This house is more than walls and furniture. It's a lifetime of work, dedication, and love. You may have thought it was just a house, but to me, it's my life story. And you cannot take someone's life story as if it were yours. Vanessa's face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and fury, but I held her gaze steadily. Calm is the most powerful weapon, and I had plenty of it. She began to speak, but I raised a hand. No words yet. Just look, learn, and understand. You may think you know everything, but you have no idea the lengths I've gone to protect what's mine. Before we continue, I want to ask, if you were watching this unfold, what would you do in Vanessa's shoes? Comment below and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories so you don't miss the next shocking moment. Vanessa finally closed the cabinet, her hands shaking. She realized the magnitude of what she had tried to do, and the lesson was only beginning. The next step would leave her completely speechless. A reminder that underestimating a grandmother's patience, intelligence, and resolve can have consequences no one expects. Vanessa's expression had shifted from confusion to desperation. She paced the study like a caged animal, muttering under her breath about how she could fix this, how she could still take control. I watched silently, letting her expend her energy while I remained calm, steady, and fully in control of the situation. Patience was my ally, and she was slowly learning just how powerful it could be. "Vanessa," I said softly, yet with authority, "you still don't understand. This house, these documents, this life I built, none of it is yours to claim. You thought you could walk in, intimidate, and take over, but all you've done is reveal your ignorance and disrespect." She spun around, her face flushed with anger. "I don't care what you say. My husband agreed with me. I am allowed to make changes." I shook my head, my voice unwavering. "No, Vanessa. You are allowed to dream, to plan, but not to trample over the hard work of others, and certainly not here, in my home." At that moment, I signaled to Frank, who was waiting quietly outside. He moved forward with a box I had prepared weeks ago. Inside were photos, letters, and personal mementos I had collected over decades. Reminders of my family's history, the sacrifices made, and the love poured into every corner of this home. Vanessa's eyes widened as Frank placed the box in front of her. She stepped closer, compelled to look, but I raised a hand. "Do not touch it yet. Just watch." I began to recount the story of each item, from the first letter my late husband wrote to me when we bought this home, to the photographs of my children growing up, to the meticulous records of every renovation, every financial decision, every moment that had kept this estate intact. Her arrogance began to crumble with each word. "You see, Vanessa," I continued, "you think power comes from imposing yourself, from trying to claim what isn't yours, but real power comes from respect, understanding, and protecting what matters. You cannot claim decades of hard work with entitlement and arrogance. That is not power. It is foolishness." She sank into a chair, speechless, her confidence shattered. I walked toward her slowly, making sure she felt the weight of my presence. "This house is not just bricks and walls. It's a lifetime of decisions, sacrifices, and love. And today, you've learned that no amount of audacity can replace wisdom and patience." Before we move forward, I want to ask, have you ever witnessed someone underestimate an older person? Comment below and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories to see how this confrontation ends. Vanessa realized she was not dealing with a frail grandmother, but a woman who had spent decades perfecting her strategy, protecting her home, and preparing for the exact moment someone like her would try to take what wasn't theirs. And the next revelation, the final piece of the plan, would leave her completely speechless, ensuring she never underestimated me again. Vanessa sat in the study, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly together. The arrogance that had carried her into my home had been stripped away, replaced by confusion, fear, and the first real taste of humility. I could see it in her eyes. She was beginning to understand that underestimating me had been a grave mistake. I walked slowly around her, letting the silence grow heavy. "Vanessa," I said, voice calm but commanding. "This is not just a house. It's a lifetime of work, of decisions, of sacrifice. And you walked in thinking you could take it all without understanding even a fraction of what it took to build it." Her lips trembled, and she tried to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Not yet. Listen. Observe. Learn. You've made one mistake after another by believing that loud words and threats could overpower experience, patience, and knowledge." I motioned to the living room, where Frank had carefully placed a series of folders and envelopes. "Open these," I instructed, "but do so slowly. Take your time." Hesitant, she unfolded the first envelope. Inside were detailed records showing how I had invested in this property, how every repair, every upgrade, and every improvement had been carefully documented. Next were letters from contractors, tax records, and legal documents proving ownership beyond a shadow of doubt. Her eyes widened with each paper she read. "You see," I continued, "you thought the house could belong to whoever wanted it most, but ownership isn't just about desire. It's about proof, dedication, and care, and you have none of those qualities." Vanessa's breathing quickened. She tried to regain some authority. I still think my husband would back me. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. Your husband respects me. He respects what I've built. And more importantly, he respects the law, which, unlike your arrogance, cannot be ignored. At that moment, the full weight of her situation hit her. She had walked into a home she thought she could claim, but every step she had taken was anticipated, recorded, and countered. I had prepared for weeks, setting up every document, every folder, and every little surprise so that when the moment came, she would see clearly who truly had control. Before I continue, I want to ask you, have you ever seen someone overconfident, only to be completely blindsided? Comment below, and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories to see how Vanessa reacts to the final revelation. Vanessa slowly sank into the nearest chair, her hands covering her face. She realized this confrontation was no longer about debate or argument. It was about truth, preparation, and the undeniable fact that she had miscalculated entirely. The next step, the final reveal, would leave her utterly speechless and ensure she never underestimated me again. The calmness in the room contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions building inside her. And as I prepared to unveil the last piece of my strategy, I knew she would remember this day for the rest of her life, the day she learned what it truly meant to cross someone who had spent a lifetime protecting her home. Vanessa remained slumped in the chair, still trying to process everything she had just seen. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, taking in the folders, the envelopes, and the perfectly organized documents that proved beyond any doubt that she had no claim here. I could see her confidence crumbling completely, replaced by panic and disbelief. I took a slow step toward her, letting the weight of my presence settle in the room. Vanessa, I said gently, you need to understand something very important. This house, this life I built, it wasn't just about bricks and walls. It's about dedication, patience, and respect. And you, with your impatience and arrogance, have disrespected every bit of it. Her hands shook as she tried to protest, but I raised a finger, silencing her. Not yet, you've spoken enough. Now, watch and learn. I signaled to Frank, who carefully brought in a large framed box from the hallway. Vanessa's eyes widened, curiosity mixed with fear. I set it down in front of her. Open it. She hesitated, but eventually lifted the glass lid. Inside were photographs, carefully arranged in chronological order, showing my life in this house. Family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, moments of love and joy. Each photo had a small note attached, explaining the story behind it and the effort it took to make it happen. It wasn't just pictures. It was proof of a life built with care, respect, and devotion. Vanessa's lips trembled. This is just so much. Yes, I said softly. Exactly. Every moment, every decision, every sacrifice I've made is here. And this, I tapped the glass, is something you cannot buy, cannot fake, and certainly cannot take away. She swallowed hard, finally realizing that this wasn't about arguing or trying to claim ownership. It was about respect. Respect for a life built over decades, for sacrifices she had never understood, and for the undeniable truth that some things cannot be stolen. I leaned closer, my voice calm but firm. Vanessa, the lesson isn't just about this house. It's about understanding the value of patience, strategy, and wisdom. You cannot force your way through life by taking what doesn't belong to you. Before we continue, let me ask, have you ever seen someone learn a lesson the hard way? Comment below and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories so you don't miss how this story concludes. Vanessa sank further into the chair, overwhelmed by the realization of what she had attempted. She had walked in confident, ready to take control, and now she faced the undeniable truth. She had underestimated a grandmother who had spent a lifetime building, protecting and preparing for moments exactly like this. And as I prepared to deliver the final part of my plan, the moment that would leave her completely speechless and ensure she would never forget this day, I knew she had no idea what was coming next. The lesson was almost complete, and the impact would be unforgettable. Vanessa's trembling hands hovered over the framed photos and documents. She looked exhausted, mentally drained from realizing she had underestimated me. For hours, she had believed she could simply take over my home, dismissing decades of effort, sacrifice, and strategy. Now, with each piece of evidence laid bare before her, the truth hit her like a tidal wave. I walked slowly around her, my voice calm, yet commanding. "Vanessa, you thought this was about intimidation and threats, but real control, real authority, comes from respect, preparation, and understanding. And you, my dear, have shown none of these qualities." Her lips quivered, and she tried to speak, but no words came. She realized she had entered a trap of patience and intellect that she hadn't even noticed forming. Every action she took, every confident stride she made had been anticipated and countered. I gestured toward the living room. "Look at everything around you. Every detail, every object, every corner. It tells the story of decades of work. Not just mine, but my family's. You cannot claim it with entitlement or arrogance. You can only try to understand it." Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the folders, the envelopes, the photos. She finally whispered, I didn't realize." "No, you didn't," I said softly. "And that is your mistake. You cannot take what you do not comprehend. You cannot seize respect, legacy, or wisdom with threats or impatience." I motioned to Frank, who quietly brought in a small wooden box. Vanessa looked at it with suspicion. "What's that?" she asked. "This," I said, opening it slowly, "is the last part of today's lesson. Inside were personal mementos, letters from my late husband, keepsakes from my children, items representing years of sacrifice and love. Each item was a reminder that life, effort, and devotion cannot be claimed by force." Vanessa sank further into the chair, speechless. Her attempts to dominate were now completely dismantled by evidence, patience, and strategy. She understood at last that this house, this home, this life I had built could never belong to her. Before I continue, I want to ask, have you ever watched someone realize the full weight of their mistake? Comment below and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories so you don't miss the final shocking conclusion. I walked closer, my calm presence overpowering the room. "Vanessa, you will leave this house today, and I want you to remember this. Respect must be earned, and arrogance will always meet its match. Today, you have learned the limits of entitlement and the power of preparation." She nodded slowly, her pride shattered, her arrogance gone. For the first time, she felt what it truly meant to be humbled. The full lesson had been delivered, and the impact was undeniable. The next moment, the final chapter of this confrontation, would ensure that Vanessa would never forget the day she attempted to take over my home and discovered the strength, wisdom, and cunning of a grandmother who would always protect what was hers. Vanessa sat quietly, the weight of reality pressing down on her. The arrogance that had brought her into my home had been completely stripped away, replaced by respect, fear, and humility. She now understood that she had walked into a battle she could not win, not with threats, not with entitlement, not with impatience. I approached her one last time, my voice calm and steady. "Vanessa, remember this day, not for the humiliation, but for the lesson. Respect is not optional. It is earned, and it is protected." Her eyes met mine, finally acknowledging the truth she had resisted for so long. She had tried to claim what wasn't hers, but in doing so, she had learned the power of preparation, patience, and wisdom. She realized that underestimating a grandmother who had spent decades protecting her home and her family was a grave mistake. I gestured toward the living room, where the photos, letters, and documents stood as silent witnesses to my life's work. "Everything you see here is irreplaceable, not because it is valuable, but because it represents a life lived with care, sacrifice, and love. That is something no one can steal, not even you." Vanessa slowly stood, her posture changed, the fight gone from her eyes. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of defeat and understanding. There was nothing more to say. The lesson had been delivered in full. Before we end, I want to ask you, have you ever seen someone realize the weight of their mistakes completely? Comment below and make sure you're subscribed to Elderly Stories to see more stories like this. As Vanessa left my home, the calm returned, the quiet of victory settling around me. I had protected what was mine, defended my legacy, and ensured that respect would always be the guiding principle in my home. Some lessons are learned the hard way, and today Vanessa had learned hers.